so many more games than you think, dozens of cousins, and one unhappy king of the cosmos demanding that you help him fix his mistakes. Today we're diving into the depths of the Katamari series, and we're playing every single game that's available and ranking them. With the newest entry that just came out, I figured what better time than now to dive in and give it the full review treatment. Now it is important to note that there's a bunch of games I'll be covering that come with a slight asterisk to them, often requiring them to be played using unconventional methods or playing an incomplete version. And there's actually a handful of games here that are just straight up lost media. But for now, I just want to dive in, starting with the very first game in the series. We're diving right into it here with the very first release in the series, Katamari Damacy on the PlayStation 2. It has an incredibly wacky Japanese flair and some truly unique gameplay mechanics that are unlike anything else that's out there even today. So the game starts off with an over-the-top musical cutscene, followed by this gigantic character known as the King of the Cosmos, telling you about how he accidentally destroyed all of the stars in the night sky, and he then gives you the task of rolling up random objects on Earth that he can then throw up into the sky to replace the missing stars. And don't worry, if the logic doesn't fully check out, that's intentional. So graphically, the game looks just okay. It has a very basic and almost flat art style. The king himself is a very bombastic and memorable character, but the designs of the NPCs and even the prince himself are also very memorable. Katamari Damacy also has fantastic music. It's wonderful and weird and really sets the mood. You play this little guy and you're rolling around a small ball-like object called a Katamari, with any objects of small enough size automatically sticking to it, which in turn makes the ball grow, allowing you to roll up even bigger objects. That's pretty much the main gameplay loop. The only thing that really changes throughout is the variety of objects that you can roll up, as well as the scale of the levels themselves. In the bottom left-hand corner of the screen, you get a constant overview of everything that you're actually picking up, and on the bottom right is a live feed of your character to make sure you never forget that you're a tiny little guy rolling this massive ball. Each level has a specific size goal that you need to reach to be able to clear it, and the majority of them also have a set amount of time for you to be able to do this. At the very end, the King of the Cosmos then ranks you based on how big the Katamari is, and the larger the size, the higher the score and praise. If you ever get to a truly spectacular size compared to the requirements, the camera zooms out super far and you actually get to see little angels flying around you. It's very satisfying. There are some side mission type levels that don't quite fit the mold. For example, there's one where you have to roll up a bunch of crabs to remake the constellation Cancer, or a truly infamous level where you need to roll up one single bear, and you're ranked on how big this bear is. And everything from this guy in a bear suit to this little sign with a bear on it will count, and the king will not be happy with most of these options. My personal favorite side level, though, is when you have to roll up a bunch of swans, all because the king wants something graceful in the night sky, which is sweet to think about until you realize exactly what would happen to all of those swans when they hit the atmosphere. Katamari Damacy definitely has a bit of a steep learning curve. The controls can feel pretty unintuitive, but once you get the hang of it, it's not particularly difficult. The two most important strategies that I've learned throughout the years of playing this series are as follows. 1. Always spend a lot of time in the starting and early areas of the game, getting as many small items as you can to grow as big as possible. As you grow larger, other areas will open up, but it's not recommended to immediately go there until you're a decent size above that threshold. Otherwise, most of the objects that you're going to come across will be too big to roll up, meaning that you'll lose way too much time playing catch up. Number 2, always roll forward. Try and avoid rolling sideways if possible, and never roll backwards if you can avoid it. Rolling in any direction but forward slows you down way too much, which costs you precious seconds. You do have the ability to pull a 180 and completely flip your perspective to the other side of the ball by pressing in the two joysticks, and you're going to want to use this ability very liberally. And that's just about all the tricks I use, otherwise just go roll and have fun. So while I am singing high praise for this game, there are a few things that I don't particularly love. The first is something that's very much an intentional choice, where the King of the Cosmos will constantly talk over your screen, and this will obscure a lot of your field of view in the various levels. I also definitely think some of the levels are just too long for their own good, with the second to last level in the game giving you a timer of 18 minutes and the final one over 20 minutes. The final level of the game actually has you roll up pretty much everything on the surface of the world in order to make the moon, and then this weird, blocky Japanese family that you've been watching cutscenes of has a final one where they're actually on the moon, and during the credits you actually get to go around and roll up countries. And that's pretty much Katamari Damacy. The gameplay still hasn't really been replicated in any other game that I've played, even this many years later. And it's that super unique gameplay, as well as the over-the-top theatrics and personalities, that really make this game stand out. This first outing was a really solid showing for the series, and the original version is still just as fun to play and jump into nowadays. And for that reason, I'm giving the game an S rank. There are plenty of other Katamari games down the line that did continue to improve upon this formula, but the foundation built here in the original is incredibly solid. There are definitely a few tweaks here and there that could have improved it, but all in all, this is still an incredibly impressive start, and I highly recommend playing this game. On to the next one. Now we're jumping into We Love Katamari, which is a direct sequel to Katamari Damacy, coming out just a year later with the same creative force at the helm. The game feels very much like a response to the unexpected fame of the first entry, with the main gameplay loop involving talking to various fans of the original game and completing their requests. We Love Katamari still has a flat and somewhat cartoony art style, which does help the visuals from getting too cluttered or hard to read. Just like the original Katamari, the game also has a very unique soundtrack, with most of the songs in this one being remixes of the original score or pretty simple tunes that mostly fade into the background. The plot of We Love Katamari is mainly told through various flashback cutscenes, and they detail the early life of the King of the Cosmos, as well as how he fell out with his own father and eventually found the love of his life, culminating in the birth of the prince that you play as. So the hub world of We Love Katamari is a pretty simple field with some random odds and ends in it, and you take on missions directly from the various NPC characters who spawn in. And there's not a strict order that the levels need to be played in, with sometimes multiple being available at the same time. The majority of these NPCs want to see things from the original game, such as the Royal Rainbow or a truly massive Katamari. But there are several of them that have unique requests. For example, rolling up expensive items so that they can afford to keep the red pandas red, or this sumo wrestler who has to get rolled around so that he can eat a ton of food and then outsize and defeat his opponent. Much like the original game, after the end of the level, the King of the Cosmos grades you on how well you did. There's actually a pretty hefty amount of levels to work through in this one, although some do end up being repeats from the same NPCs a second or even third time around, usually just with a more difficult requirement. Something I really appreciate though is that they introduce quite a few new level types, like rolling up a specific number of objects as fast as you can, or rolling up fireflies to increase how bright it is. It felt like the vast majority of the levels have you doing something completely unique. While some of these level types are a lot weaker than others, I'm looking at you, second bear level, I did really enjoy how much variety is on display here. The ultimate goal of We Love Katamari is to roll up the sun, and you actually get the opportunity to do this just a few levels in and fail, and you can reattempt it at any time. However, you're first going to need to roll up the other stars and constellations that you make by doing levels for other NPCs, because without enough of them, the Katamari won't have enough mass. You don't have to complete every single level in the game to be able to roll up the sun, which is something I did appreciate since not every level is a winner. One other small change that was pretty fun is that in addition to the cosmetics that you roll up, you can also roll up different characters that look like the prince and are referred to as his cousins. And once you've rolled them up, you can actually swap to them and play as them instead. So that being said, the same issues that I had with the original game are still present here, and they're still relatively minor, although a new one is that We Love Katamari has so much dialogue to skip through. And because most of the dialogue is essentially gibberish or not related at all to what you're doing, there isn't really a reason to actually read it, and it just makes the entire process kind of annoying. Even with these minor flaws though, the gameplay loop is extremely satisfying and it's very well represented here. So then, with all of that in mind, how does We Love Katamari actually stack up against the original game? Honestly, pretty well. I did really enjoy the increased variety in the levels, even if there was a bit more repetition overall. I do wish that the various quibbles I had with the original game had been fixed up here, and I do miss the more catchy music of the original Katamari Damacy, but I still had a lot of fun playing We Love Katamari. So with all of that in mind, I would give We Love Katamari a high A rank. We Love Katamari does add in a nice amount of variety, and it does manage to recapture some of the magic of the original game, but it did feel in a lot of ways like it was retreading the same ground. The variety in the different levels was nice, but having to repeat the same ones over and over at the end wasn't quite as fun as getting to try new ones. I do feel like it's a worthy sequel, and if you like the original game, probably one that you're going to want to check out. Now we're actually covering our first piece of lost media. In 2005, to promote the release of the game We Love Katamari, the North American marketing team collaborated with an online marketing agency named iBlaster to release a banner ad that would show on their website, in which you played a very simple flash game where you could roll up bystanders while dealing with a time limit. This banner ad was only ever featured on the American Katamari website. The old North American Katamari website from this era can still be accessed, and so can the iBlaster website, both of them courtesy of the Internet Archive. You can even go to the page where the banner ad game was supposed to be hosted, but unfortunately this was never archived, meaning there's nothing available to actually play. This isn't something that was ever really meant to be saved long term, even if it was quite unique and technically a game. If there ever is a way to actually play this game, I'd be more than happy to review it, but as of right now, unfortunately it falls under the category of lost media, where it's no longer playable in any form. I would put this at the very bottom of the lost media tier list in regards to how likely it is we will ever find a playable version. Being that it's a flash game built into an ad, it seems very unlikely. Now we're covering Me and My Katamari, which was released for the PSP and marks the Katamari series' first foray into handheld gaming, a trend that they would not only continue but actually shift a lot of their focus to in the future. This game does its best to offer a fully fledged Katamari experience on the go, and despite the hardware limitations, I do think they managed to succeed for the most part, with a few caveats. In Me and My Katamari, the King of the Cosmos and company are having a beach vacation, and it's your job to roll up various objects in order to create islands per the specifications of the local wildlife. Yes, if you're wondering, this is the beach episode of the Katamari series. Visually, Me and My Katamari looks very similar to the two original games on the PS2, and I think the Katamari art style actually lended itself pretty well to the PSP. That being said, there did seem to be significantly fewer locations available in the game, with the vast majority of them taking place in the exact same area of the map, just at different scales. Me and My Katamari also unfortunately suffered from performance issues, with the frame rate often plummeting, as well as long loading times within the levels themselves, and when you get to larger sizes there's a ton of pop-in for the various objects, which makes planning out where you're going to roll a lot more difficult. And Me and My Katamari will also daisy chain multiple levels together to get around the fact that the PlayStation Portable can't really handle having objects of all sizes from when you're tiny to when you're massive loaded into the same level. This was one of several workarounds that they used to make Katamari work on the PSP, but there were a few others that they had to employ as well, most notably in terms of the controls. So in a standard Katamari game, you roll the ball around with the two thumbsticks, but seeing as the PSP only has one, the control scheme for this game is very unique. To roll forward, you hold up on the D-pad or thumbstick and also the triangle button. To roll sideways, it's left or right on the joystick and then circle or square, and to roll backwards is down and X. You can turn a little bit while you're moving forward or backward, but if you turn too much, then the Katamari actually stops moving, and instead the camera starts to pan around you. I found the control scheme to have a pretty steep learning curve. At the start, it feels extremely counterintuitive. One nice feature though is that the music from the original Katamari does return and sounds as good as ever. It would have been nice to have an entirely original soundtrack, but getting to hear the old classics was almost as good. There are three main islands that you can travel to. The first island is the main hub, where you can save the game or adjust your settings, and you take on the majority of your missions here from various animal characters. The second island that you visit has a volcano, and here you take on some special side missions from other characters that are a bit outside the norm. The final island is the Beanstalk Island, and it contains all of your cousins, which just like in the previous game, you can swap to them and play as them whenever you want. The levels themselves are relatively short, usually being around 5 to 6 minutes, although as mentioned, often they do daisy chain several together without a real stopping point. I actually liked the shorter levels since it worked well with the amount of stuff available in these environments, and it caters a lot more to playing a game on a handheld. That being said though, there was definitely a lot less variety in the levels themselves compared to the original game, with the vast majority of the missions having returned to the formula of just roll the Katamari as big as possible within the time limit. The special requests from Volcano Island were a little bit different, and I do wish that there had been more like those to help mix things up. Me and My Katamari ends after you've completed all of the requests for the different animals, after which the king himself has a final request, and once again you play multiple stages in a row, eventually growing so big that you can actually roll up the king and queen. screen. They also once again include a fun minigame during the credits sequence. In Me and My Katamari, it's a 2D platformer version of Katamari, where you have multiple lives and you're rolling across the screen. I actually really enjoyed this little minigame. It was a truly fresh and unique idea, and it didn't overstay its welcome. Me and My Katamari is a pretty solid entry in the series. I definitely don't think it quite competes with the first two games, with the performance issues, awkward controls, and also lack of variety working against it, but it was still honestly quite a bit of fun to play. So for me, this game lands right in the middle of the B rank bracket. There's nothing really wrong with it, and it's definitely an enjoyable experience. All of the concessions that they had to make so that the game could run definitely bring it down a notch. The best compliment that I can give this game though is that there were legitimately times where I forgot I was playing a PSP instead of a PlayStation 2. I would definitely try it out if you can get your hands on it, and cross your fingers for a modern re-release. And now we're jumping into the first official Flash game that was released for the Katamari series. As best as I can tell, Shooting Katamari came out in 2005, with that data being thanks to the oldest capture available on the Wayback Machine. In this game, you control the prince by moving your mouse across the bottom of the screen, and if you click on him, he stops moving and begins to shoot. Clicking again stops him from shooting, and he'll once again follow your mouse. He cannot shoot while moving. There's only 3 stages, with each stage seeming to have some kind of trick or gimmick that you need to discover to be able to progress. For example, in the very first stage, you actually need to go out of bounds of the game window to be able to clear all the blocks and progress. Stage 2 seems to have something to do with shooting in the middle of the screen and then possibly moving your character upwards, but unfortunately the Wayback Machine can only do so much for a game this old, with the archive for it being somewhat incomplete, meaning that these assets in the middle here don't ever load, which prevents me from actually progressing. There doesn't seem to be any records at all of stage 3, meaning there's no way for me to actually try it, so this review stops a little bit early. That being said though, this game sucked. If you know the tricks for each level, it can probably be beaten in 30 seconds or less. There's absolutely no depth to it, and basic things like not being able to shoot while you're moving made it feel even more archaic. It's another game where if I can ever actually access the full version, I would give it a more full and thorough review, but for the time being, it'll sit pretty comfortably in the F tier. This is such a basic game with really nothing going on at all. There are a lot of amazing Flash games that were released back in the day, this just isn't one of them. Now it's time to cover yet another official Katamari Flash game. This one is called 8-Bit Katamari. 8-Bit Katamari has a very different playstyle with more of a top-down view for a Flash game, especially one that's going for an 8-bit aesthetic. I do think that the graphics look pretty solid. All of the different cousins and the king all look very distinct and readable when they're on your screen. The music is also a very fun 8-bit rendition of the Katamari Damacy song. The gameplay is relatively simple. The prince will follow around your cursor, which is represented by the face of the king of the cosmos. As you get the prince to move across the screen, any objects that are smaller than the Katamari will be rolled up, slowly making your Katamari larger and allowing you to roll up larger objects as you progress. Hitting objects that are too large to roll up, like fire trucks or people, will cause all of the items that you have gathered to go exploding off of the Katamari, and so will pressing your mouse button. The prince can actually collide with your cursor, bouncing backwards, and the Katamari ball can get large enough to actually roll up the face of the king, after which it begins moving with a mind of its own. The levels don't really end, but eventually if you progress far enough, you can roll up the grass floor, which reveals a pastel picture below of the king. In a lot of ways, 8-Bit Katamari actually reminds me of another popular Flash game from around the same time called Fishy, but this time with a fun Katamari spin on it. There are several game modes, with the second one being a 2-play variant, which doesn't actually have 2 different players. Instead, there's 2 different cousins on screen that are following your mouse cursor, and this can continue all the way up to 6 of them on screen at once. Having multiple cousins actually makes it a lot more chaotic, and if the Katamari ball of one of them gets much larger than of another, they can actually roll that cousin up. If you click on the top of the pyramid on the main menu here, there's a secret game mode which involves 48 cousins, although nowhere near that many actually appear on screen simultaneously. Instead, as you roll up various cousins, more will spawn in and flood the screen. No matter what level you actually clear or how many cousins are involved, it's always the same image at the bottom under the grass. 8-Bit Katamari actually ran perfectly, which was a really nice change of pace, since for a lot of old Flash games like this that are preserved thanks to things like the Internet Archive, it's always somewhat of a gamble, but I had no issues with this one. It was a lot more fun than I was actually expecting, especially for so simple of a concept. I did enjoy that there was some actual strategy to it, and had I played this back in the day, I probably would have absolutely loved it. It was also the perfect length for a game of this type, ending just as I was starting to get bored of it. And for that reason, and almost against my my better judgment, I'd actually give this game a very high C rank. If you're willing to put in the effort and get 8-bit Katamari Damacy to run, it's a fun diversion for 10 minutes or so. And if you are a fan of old school Flash games, I would definitely recommend giving it a try if you can. Now we're rolling into the very first official port of the original Katamari Damacy. It's called Katamari Damacy Mobile. Being that it was not available for any phones in North America or PAL regions, and was entirely locked to Japan, it's a version of this game that most people have never heard of, much less played. Visually, it looks pretty close to how the original version of the game looks. Everything still reads pretty well, even on a tiny phone screen. Since this game was released on a bunch of different phone models, there are several versions, but the differences between them are pretty small, mostly just in the title screen and different menus. Some versions do have a very brief cutscene, while others don't. Performance-wise, across the board, it does seem to struggle a bit, mainly in terms of maintaining a consistent frame rate. A lot of the footage that you're seeing here is from an emulator, but I do have this game on an actual phone as well to compare, and the same exact issues were present. And speaking of the hardware, this game ran on the Docomo phones that were exclusive to Japan, and it was played through a service called iMode, which allowed Java games to be downloaded through a website storefront. This version of Katamari Damacy is a relatively straightforward port, but with many reduced features as a result of it running on very old cellular hardware. It's controlled entirely by what qualifies as this phone's version of a D-pad, which is located at the top, and you move the Katamari by pressing forward, you can move the camera with left or right, and then you move backwards by pressing down. Control-wise, it feels halfway decent, which surprised me. There's also a secondary intuitive control scheme where the Katamari is rolled around by tilting the phone. The music present in this version seems to be instrumental MIDI versions of the songs from the original game. This is also where I should mention that we actually only have a playable demo available. The demo only comes with the first area, in which there are a few different modes that may or may not be playable depending on which version you have. Time trial is more or less the same as just playing through the level normally. It's just about seeing how big you can roll in a specific level within a time limit. The perfect size mode seems to be based on those challenges where you need to reach a certain size and stop, with no actual indicator of how big you are on screen, and Eternal mode is pretty self-explanatory. The idea behind the content for this game was that you would download the rest of the maps from a service for a fee, but unfortunately these services have obviously shut down, and there have yet to be copies of the other maps recovered as of the recording of this video. There does seem to have been 5 different worlds available, so in theory there were at least 5 courses total. So because there's so little content available to actually play, there isn't really much more I can say in this review. The first level is fine, but the game definitely controls, looks, and performs worse than it did on the PS2. Based on what little I was able to actually play of Katamari Damacy Mobile for the Docomo line of phones, I would give it a low C rank. Playing this version of the game definitely feels like a novelty, but without the context of playing it during the time of release, it doesn't really hold up. If ever the full version of Katamari Damacy Mobile becomes playable, I'd love to revisit it and give it a more full and educated review, but based on what little of it I'm actually able to play at the moment, I think the rank I gave it is pretty fair. We're covering the first Katamari game that released in HD, Beautiful Katamari on the Xbox 360. Beautiful Katamari opens with the King of the Cosmos playing tennis with the Queen, and he hits the ball so hard that it cracks the night sky and creates a black hole, which sucks up everything around it. The King uses his power and manages to stop the black hole from consuming the entire universe, and he then enlists the help of the Prince to help him fix his mistake by rolling up objects on Earth to make new stars. Graphically, the game looks really clean, and while some of that is thanks to having played it on the Xbox Series X through backwards compatibility, just as much of that is thanks to the art design, which takes the relatively flat aesthetic of the previous games and brings it very well into the HD universe. Beautiful Katamari also has a rock-solid frame rate, meaning that it was the smoothest experience yet, and the game also has a pretty diverse soundtrack, being my favorite in the series since the original. The majority of the levels that you play through follow the same basic structure that the series is known for, with the Prince being sent to Earth and then tasked with rolling a Katamari ball to a certain size, usually with a sub-objective of trying to primarily roll up objects of a specific type. Beautiful Katamari does introduce some new ideas though, like levels where you need to roll up hot foods and objects while avoiding cold ones, and then reach a certain temperature, and if your temperature ever plummets down to 0, you lose. I do find that the King of the Cosmos scores the levels a lot more harshly than he did in the previous games, often being extremely dissatisfied with your work, requiring multiple passes on the various levels if you want to achieve a high score. It also does feel like they very heavily metered out exactly how long it takes to complete these levels, because I rarely had more more than 30 seconds to a minute left after hitting the main objective. The time limit on most of the courses is right on the money, rarely if ever exceeding 10 minutes, with the majority of the levels being between 3 to 6. The only exception to this is the final level, which is 18 minutes long, and this is also the first console Katamari release that had DLC available. And unfortunately, they did decide to nickel and dime everyone with a ton of different DLC packs for the game, featuring everything from gamer picks to downloadable cousins, DLC levels, and more. The DLC levels integrate really well with the main levels of the game and feel like fun and unique challenges. For example, there's one where you have to roll things up within a certain monetary budget. So overall, I do think the DLC levels are fun additions and worth getting if you enjoy the game. The final level of Beautiful Katamari sees you going from a relatively small size all the way up until the point where you're rolling up the stars, planets, and constellations. This is very similar to the ending sequence from We Love Katamari, but elevated. Getting to a large enough size and then rolling up the black hole ends the game, with the prince having managed to restore order to the universe, and then in true Katamari fashion, there's a unique minigame that you can play while the credits scroll, which this time around is a vertical shooter, tasking you with shooting objects from the Katamari ball in order to break up the larger objects so that you can roll them up. Beating Beautiful Katamari also opens up a new level where you need to roll up things to make the planet Uranus, and what you need to roll up is very specific things at the request of the king. It's very similar to one of the side levels in Me and My Katamari. This level in particular was very unique, as the Katamari ball that you're rolling up is actually the king himself. But this level definitely got annoying real fast, as there's a million dialogue boxes that you have to skip through. And this is at odds with the majority of the rest of the game, where they kept the gibberish dialogue down to a minimum. This is also the first Katamari game that had achievements, but I don't think that they did a particularly great job implementing them, having some really obscure ones that you would never normally do, like needing to reverse your camera angle 30 times in a single level. Beautiful Katamari manages to roll its way into the pantheon of Katamari games very well, rising very much to the top, offering a very polished and fun experience. While most of what this game has to offer will feel like old news to regular players of the series, everything that it does extremely well, and it does bring a lot of new and fun ideas to the table. And while I still think it's a couple notches below the original, it's not much lower on the list, resulting in this game also getting an S rank. This is another game in the Katamari series that I really hope gets a re-release, because I'd love for more fans of the series to get to experience it, and with it locked exclusively to Xbox consoles, it still remains one of the lesser known titles. If you can get your hands on a copy of the game and own an Xbox Series console, I do recommend giving this one a go. Rolling up the universe has rarely felt as fun as it did here. Beautiful Katamari Matching Game is yet another Flash game released by Bandai Namco to promote the series, specifically the Xbox 360 game Beautiful Katamari. This was also the last official Flash game that was released for the series as far as I'm aware. The gameplay is pretty simple, it's just a basic flip over cards until you can match two together. It's a type of game that pretty much everyone has played before. The cards actually feature various characters from the Katamari series, mainly the cousins, but also including the king, queen, and the prince. Matching two of the cards successfully will actually add it to the set, and it will then give you a brief profile about each cousin, telling you a bit about them. This was intended as a way to promote the new characters that were in the Beautiful Katamari game. You flip cards to match, that's really all there is to it. There are a ton of different cards on the board, so it'll definitely take a few minutes to clear this, but it's not particularly exciting or complicated to do, and there's no real penalties for mismatching cards. The art is cool, and I guess the idea is kind of interesting, but it's not particularly exciting. So with all that in mind, there's very little for me to actually say or review here, and I'd have to give it an F rank. As a promotional tool, it's not the worst idea, but playing it as an actual game, it leaves a lot to be desired. I'm sure there are better designed Match 2 games out there, and if you're really into this sort of thing, I'd probably go looking for them instead of playing this one here. It's another strange oddity in the history of the Katamari series, but it's definitely one of the ones that you should skip, because you'll miss absolutely nothing if you do. Now we're playing yet another Keitai Japanese exclusive phone game, simply called Katamari Damasikun. This game is based on the 8-bit minigame from the end of the PSP game Me and My Katamari, having the same mechanics but lots of levels instead of just the one. Aesthetically, it matches pretty much perfectly to what it was based on, which is a nice touch. The music in Katamari Damasikun is entirely instrumental piano renditions of songs from the original game. This worked for the most part, but it did get repetitive pretty quickly. So in this game, you roll the Katamari ball around on the screen as the screen itself slowly pushes to the right. Any objects that are smaller than the ball will stick to it as usual, slowly increasing the size and allowing you to roll up larger objects as you progress through the game. There are many obstacles that are too large to overcome, which requires you to jump over them, and that's actually pretty tricky to do in this game. If your Katamari gets sandwiched between something on the right side of the screen as the left side advances, it'll actually squish you to death and you'll fail and lose a life. The main game mode is the story mode, which is broken up into 3 different sections, each with 3 levels. There is actually a small amount of plot here, with the King of the Cosmos almost colliding with the moon, managing to miss it just in the nick of time, but unfortunately he dropped his royal medals on Earth as a result. Clearing each set of 3 stages and hitting the required size will allow you to then roll up one of these medals later on, and after collecting all 3 of the medals, there's then a short cutscene of the king and the prince walking into the castle. Unfortunately, the controls are pretty sluggish and very finicky, meaning that this game was not so easy to actually play. The mechanic of wall jumping your way over obstacles just sometimes does not work, resulting in a lot of deaths that feel like they should have been avoidable. And unfortunately, the field of view is so narrow, and the obstacles come at you so fast that there's very little time to react. You're going to need to memorize each level and all of the dangerous sections, as opposed to be able to just play through it intuitively as you go. Without any kind of advanced warning about these life or death moments, it really just is a marathon of trial and error. That being said, the levels themselves did have a decent amount of variety to them, which was nice. Each level did also have multiple paths that you could take to get to the end, meaning that there's probably a good amount of replayability here, especially if you're someone who likes going for a high score. There is one other game type, which is just called the normal game mode, which gives you an actual time limit for the levels, 3 lives instead of just 2, and the goal is to just basically outlast the timer. So all in all, Katamari Damasikun is a fun little diversion, but due to some strange design choices and controls that only sort of worked, I did find it a lot more frustrating than fun to play. I do think it's a case of having too much of a good thing, because as a one-off level in the PSP game, this worked really well. So as a result of this, I'd give Katamari Damasikun a D rank. If you're interested in playing this type of game, I'd honestly just recommend getting the PSP Katamari and playing through the credits level. It is the kind of thing that's fun to play for a few minutes, but not so much for a few hours. It just didn't really come together in a meaningful way for me in this one. There was a Katamari game exclusively released in Korea, which also had the name of Katamari Damacy Mobile. This one had the exact same gameplay as Katamari Damasikun. This is once again a game where there is so little information that actually exists out there that it's really hard to tell what it was all about. It may have been a sequel to Katamari Damasikun, but the screenshots that exist seem to indicate that it was more of a direct port. It may have also had unique levels, but again, it's very hard to say. The different sources online seem to have conflicting information about this one. One of the few things that is known is that there was a horizontal play mode, which does make it a bit different than Katamari Damasikun, which was portrait only. This is yet another piece of lost media, meaning that we may never get the full story of exactly what this game was. I would definitely be down to try this one out and know for sure if it ever does turn up in a playable state. This one also seems pretty unlikely that we'll get our hands on a playable version, since it was only released in one region for a very short period of time. Now we're trying out Rolling with Katamari, which is an isometric spin-off released for Nokia phones. This game has a few different versions, all with the exact same gameplay and levels, just with varying levels of graphics depending on which model of phone you had. So for the purposes of this review, I'm playing the one that's less rough on the eyes. Rolling with Katamari tries to replicate the experience of a console Katamari game, using sprites, pixels, and an isometric point of view. Aesthetically, it does manage to be a pretty faithful translation, with most of the characters and even familiar objects being very recognizable. There are some cutscenes that are unlockable, but it's generous to say that this game has a story. The cutscenes seem to be recycled from the original Katamari Damacy on the PS2, but they do weave their own plot. The subtitles for the dialogue are mostly original. The point of the game is just to roll up as many things as you can and complete the levels. Most of these levels do mimic the ones from the original game, such as rolling up a star or making constellations from various specific objects. There's also 2 new level types that were introduced in this game for the very first time. You need to roll around and reach a specific size without picking up a specific type of object. For example, bugs or angry people. This may sound easy, but with bouncing off of objects that are too large, as well as animals that will seek you out and knock you away, it can be pretty challenging. The second new mission type requires you to roll over checkpoints in a specific order, and they're represented by signs in the game with numbers on them, 1, 2, 3, and 4. And they'll often hide the checkpoints behind barriers of very large objects, so you do need to make sure you're constantly growing the Katamari. The controls were mostly functional, if a bit unresponsive at times. Using the middle buttons on the phone, which work basically as a D-pad, you push up to start moving forward, and then you can turn the Katamari with the left and right, or move backwards with down, and you can also strafe from side to side or switch directions. And by repeatedly tapping the up button, you can send the Katamari careening forwards. My biggest issue with rolling with Katamari is actually the hitboxes of the items and scenery, which is made worse by the slightly off-kilter perspective and the somewhat touchy controls. There are often times where a Katamari can clearly go through a gap, or where you're definitely not rolling over an object that you're passing, but the hit detection is so bad that it won't let you through the gap, or you'll accidentally roll up something that you shouldn't have. It was very noticeable, especially in the city levels. Another of my big complaints with this game is the lack of variety. There's only a few different course locations, and after about halfway through rolling with Katamari, you're just repeating the same city level over and over until the very end. In the second to last level, Roll Up a Star 10, you roll the Katamari around until it's large enough to make a new moon, just like in the original game. And then the very last level has you rolling up individual countries, kind of like in the credits of Katamari Damacy. While it's far from terrible and definitely playable, there's just nothing here that's really worth checking out or going back to. So with all that in mind, I would give it a D rank. Overall, it is a very competently made game. It's something that you can tell was made by game designers who understood the property, and they also understood the hardware that they were working with. I'm sure that they did the absolute best they could with the Nokia platform, but by today's standards, it just doesn't really hold up. I would probably consider this one not really worth checking out, even if you're a diehard fan of the series. Now we're covering I Love Katamari, one of the very first mobile games in the Katamari series that was widely available in all regions, releasing for Android, iOS, and eventually even Windows phones. It very much feels like a port of Katamari Damacy Mobile, but with unique objectives for the levels, as well as updated graphics and an entirely new control scheme. The game also only plays in landscape, not having a portrait mode option. I Love Katamari starts off with the King of the Cosmos narrowly avoiding smashing into the moon that you made in Katamari Damacy. He gets hit in the head by a meteorite during his dodge maneuver and loses some of his memories as a result. In order to refresh his memory, he has you roll up objects that he's forgotten, like a calico cat. Graphically, the game actually looks pretty good, with the cutscenes, menus, the prints, and the Katamari ball itself all looking pretty high resolution for the time. A lot of the objects that you roll up, though, are extremely low res, having very blurry textures. The music in I Love Katamari all seems to be tracks from the original Katamari Damacy, and they do sound pretty good, if a bit repetitive. Performance-wise, the game was just okay, occasionally feeling a bit sluggish and laggy. Much like all of the previous entries in the series, you play the prince, and you roll around a sticky ball called a Katamari, with anything that's smaller than the current size of your Katamari getting rolled up alongside it. In I Love Katamari, the ball is controlled by tilting your device up, down, left, and right. There is no alternative control scheme, you have to use the motion controls. You can tap on the ball a few times to get it to shoot forward, and tapping to the side of the ball will cause it to strafe a little, but I could never really get this to work properly. There is very little nuance in these controls, meaning that you're usually barreling forward or barely moving. And this is also a game where the camera is not your friend, often being way too zoomed in for you to be able to actually see the hazards around you, and also constantly whip panning around or getting stuck behind certain objects. There are only 5 actual levels in the game, each with a story mode mission that has you roll up a specific item for the king. You do typically need to roll up the majority of the other items in each level to reach a size where you can actually roll up what the king is looking for. Even though there are only 5 levels to it, the story mode is surprisingly lengthy purely because of how easy it is to fail these levels, mainly due to the sparsely populated objects and very rough control scheme. And in addition to the story mode missions, each of these different planets also has 3 other possible missions that you can complete in each level. Time trial gives you a set amount of time, with the objective being to roll the Katamari to the largest size possible. You don't get anything for doing this, it's basically just all about the high score. Exact size requires you to try and get the Katamari as close as possible to a specific size without having any kind of indicator on your screen. There's also nothing to actually show you what that size looks like, so it's complete guesswork. Eternal mode lets you roll around endlessly until you get bored, and there's no time limit. So if for some reason you have the urge to 100% complete this game, this is definitely the mode to do it in, as you can roll up every item you need for the collection without any stress. Since these extra modes have no real fail conditions, missions, just an unhappy king if you don't do well, and they also don't unlock any new levels unlike the story mode missions. It's hard to say if you really need to clear them to actually have beaten the game. The Windows 7 phone version of this game also apparently had some built-in achievements, but that's missing from this Android version that I'm playing. I absolutely despised how this game controlled, with the level of imprecision being consistently frustrating, and combined with a camera that is actively working against you, it just made for a bad overall experience. It has way too many flaws due to the hardware and control scheme to ever really enter the realm of fun. So with all of that in mind, I'd drop it at the very top of the D tier. I genuinely found myself annoyed and frustrated with the story missions, and then bored in all of the side missions. The only thing that really carries this game is the novelty of playing a mostly functioning standard type Katamari game on a mobile phone, but that's just not enough at this point, with so many other entries in the series doing it significantly better. If you try hard enough, you might be able to have some fun while playing I Love Katamari, but I'd probably recommend just passing on this one. Korogashi Puzzle Katamari Damacy is a very unusual game in the series, having completely unique gameplay unlike anything else that Katamari has done. The game was released as a DSiWare title in Japan, and it's one of the few DS games out there that actually has you hold the DS sideways. Once you learn the menu navigation, you can get through it pretty easily regardless of whether or not you can read Japanese. Korogashi Puzzle Katamari Damacy is a puzzle game, and visually it looks pretty similar to Tetris, with blocks dropping down from the top onto a grid that's in the middle of the screen. And if you line up an entire row of blocks across the screen, it will clear it. You can always see what's coming up next on one side of the screen, and you can actually grab the blocks out of order. If they ever reach the black hole at the top, they automatically drop down wherever they want. And the blocks that are dropping are not solid objects like in Tetris where they hold their shape. If there's an open space below one of the squares, it will always fall down as far as it can. And another thing that makes this game different than Tetris is that there's also objects that fall that are not blocks, such as fruit, people, scissors, you name it. There's also a special Katamari ball block that once placed will have the prince sweeping up all the items in his path that are not blocks until he eventually stops. This adds a unique twist to the gameplay, forcing you to plan around clearing these pieces as well as making normal rows, all in an effort to keep the things on your screen as low as possible. Much like in Tetris, if the pieces ever reach the top of the screen, it's game over. And most of the levels do have an objective and a timer, and if you don't complete the mission objective within the time, it's also game over. The King of the Cosmos will also throw hazards at you and change up the gameplay. This happening is usually denoted by a countdown timer on your screen. You need to roll up a block that has the king's face on it before the timer hits 0 to stop this from happening. If you aren't able to, there's a few different things that the king can do to actually mess with you. One of the worst being increasing the speed of your blocks that are coming up. Something that does help though is these present boxes. Once rolled up, these will give you a special ability that you can trigger at will, such as forcing a bunch of Katamari balls to be the next in the queue, or having the queen clear out several rows off the top for free. Using these different powers was absolutely key to being able to complete the game. The plot of Korogashi Puzzle Katamari Damacy is pretty basic. The king has once again caused a bunch of chaos and opened up a black hole, and it's your job as the prince to help him stop it from destroying the entire universe. The game consists of 5 different planets, each of which contains 10 levels. Each planet has a different objective. The first planet requires you to make a certain amount of stars per level, which is indicated by this number over here. Each star requires 7 or more objects to count. The second planet, the yellow one, needs you to roll up a certain amount of objects of a certain type in each level. For example, needing to get 20 pairs of scissors, etc. The red planet once again requires you to roll up a certain number of objects, but this time it's in a single Katamari as opposed to spread out across an entire level. Most of these levels felt like legitimate puzzles, usually with only 1 or 2 solutions. The blue planet just requires you to outlast the timer, with the levels getting progressively harder as the time passes. The final planet, the purple one, requires you to roll up a certain amount of items throughout the entire level, and thankfully it doesn't need to be in one single roll. After completing all 5 of the planets, you can then actually go to the black hole itself. And this final special level has you rolling up 30 meteors total, each of which will have a minimum of 7 items, and then the king throws all of them into the black hole, plugging it up for good. This final level took me longer to beat than the entire rest of the game. There are a few other modes in this game, like an endless mode with different levels of difficulty, but otherwise that's pretty much it. I definitely don't like this game anywhere near as much as a normal Katamari, so with all of that in mind, I'd drop this game right into the middle of the C tier. It's pretty solid for what it is, but it doesn't really do anything special or spectacular. If you enjoy puzzle games similar to this one, you might have a better experience with it than I did. I found myself wishing more often than not that I was playing classic Tetris instead of this. Now it's time to check out Katamari's exclusive PS3 offering, Katamari Forever. Katamari Forever starts with the King of the Cosmos trying to jump into the sky, hitting his head and going into a coma as a result. To fill the void that's left by his presence, the various cousins decide to build a robotic king to replace him, with the first level of the game having you roll up his reactor core to activate him. Robo King subsequently goes on a rampage, destroying all of the stars in the night sky, and you end up taking missions from both Robo King and the original king. Katamari Forever has a different art style for the very first time in the main series, going for a scratchy looking coloring book aesthetic. It is a little odd to look back on this one considering that they never went back to the style, but a stylized aesthetic like this helps hide a lot of the rough edges that are due to the graphical capabilities of the PlayStation 3. The characters in Katamari Forever are all super fun, with the anxiety-riddled Robo King being a surprising addition, and I also really like that you get to see the personality of the queen as well. The music is very solid in Katamari Forever, having a fun mix of original tracks and also remixes of the classics. In terms of performance, the game definitely struggles a lot with the PlayStation 3 hardware not really being able to keep up. There is quite a bit of slowdown in areas that are very densely filled with objects, only for the game to speed back up to normal as soon as you go somewhere else. Control-wise, it plays like a normal Katamari title, with you pushing both joysticks forward to move, being able to do a 180 by pushing them in, and quickly moving them back and forth will cause the prince to shoot forwards. One new ability that they brought into Katamari Forever is the Prince Hop, giving you the ability to jump for the first time in a 3D entry. To do so, you need to quickly raise up your controller using the motion tracking built into 6-axis controllers, meaning that if you have a third-party controller, you're completely unable to do this. And even using an official controller, this mechanic doesn't work particularly well. There are several well-known returning features in Katamari Forever, such as rolling up cousins that you can then play as, or wearable cosmetics that you get from rolling up presents. But Katamari Forever also features a couple new aspects as well in the form of power-ups. While rolling through the stages, you can find these full and broken hearts, and once you roll through them, the Katamari ball will then suck up everything around it, either instantly or for a short period of time. The levels are split into two different types, with one half being relatively new levels that are performed for the Robo King, with the main goal of these being to help restore the stars that he had destroyed. On the flip side, you do many levels inside the mind of the King of the Cosmos, and these are all repeats from previous games in order to help him restore his lost memories. In a lot of ways, this makes the game feel kind of like a Katamari Greatest Hits. That being said though, there are a few new level types that you'll do for the Robo King, and Katamari Forever actually has one of my favorite levels in the entire series. An entirely new idea where your Katamari ball rolls up water and goes around a desert area restoring the foliage until the water runs out, after which you replenish your supply and keep going. This feels like one of the few completely unique ideas that has been done with the Katamari formula since its release. And Katamari Forever also brings back some insanely long timers, with plenty of levels being well above the 10-minute mark and some even closing in on 20. And one aspect that really does feel like it has been dialed back up to 11 is the amount of text that you need to skip through and the amount of time that the king's faces will be on your screen, always appearing at the start and then mid-level, obscuring your field of view while they talk. And the king and the Robo King are also just as unforgiving in this one as they were in Beautiful Katamari, often ranking your performance during the levels very poorly. There's a bunch of trophies that you can try and unlock, but like most Katamari games, trying for them is not a particularly fun experience, and I don't personally recommend going for the platinum. When the real king is finally woken up from his slumber, Robo King suddenly realizes his ultimate fate, but he also does nothing about it, with the actual king having you fully dismantle him. You then enter a special level where you roll up the King of the Cosmos' dreams, followed by a credits minigame where you're bouncing the prince up towards the top of the screen and trying to collect as many objects as possible. Beating the game unlocks a new mode called Katamari Drive, where the levels play out the exact same and have the same time limit, but your Katamari rolls at a significantly increased speed. You can also unlock an eternal mode for these levels, and also some levels feature a classic mode where the new features such as jumping and power-ups are disabled. Katamari Forever is a pretty solid entry in the series, if a bit run-of-the-mill. With so many of the levels and mission types being full-on repeats from previous games, it definitely does feel like it's treading water in a lot of ways, not really pushing the series forward in any noticeable way. That being said, the rare times that it does introduce new ideas, they're usually very well executed and a lot of fun. Katamari Forever probably hits a lot harder if you aren't someone who has played through a ton of the previous games, because all of these old levels are still very much fun. The problem is that we've seen them half a dozen times or more at this point. I would give this game an A rank, very much on par with We Love Katamari. And just like that game, it feels in a lot of ways like a rehashing of the same thing that we've seen before, and being so far down the line, that's gotten gotten a little bit stale. If you've never played a Katamari game and for some reason you don't want to start with the original, this is definitely a pretty good jumping in point, showing a lot of the best aspects of the series in quick succession. Now we're playing yet another Katamari Ketai game. This one is called Oi Katamari Damasikun, and it's once again based off the 8-bit credit sequence from the PSP game Me and My Katamari. Oi Katamari Damasikun is very similar to the previously released Katamari Damasikun, but it takes the concept a little bit further this time, building on the mechanics that were introduced previously and adding in a new splash of variety and creativity. Graphically, it still looks very similar to what it was originally inspired by, and the music is once again MIDI piano remixes of songs from the original Katamari Damacy on the PS2. There may have been a plot to this one, but unfortunately the playable version that has been preserved seems to have some glitches and missing text. Because of this, there's no real way to know for sure, but thankfully, like pretty much all of the different Katamari games, and especially these spin-offs, the plot is pretty inconsequential anyways. Oi Katamari Damasikun originally ran through a launcher, and then there were 3 separate packs that you could download. They were titled Map A, Map B, and Map C. Each of these different packs consist of up to 5 different levels, and you do get medals for completing the objectives within them. The primary level type is still the same as in Katamari Damasikun, where the level scrolls to the right and you need to survive while constantly rolling things up, and then you either need to outlast the timer or reach a specific endpoint. The Katamari ball is once again rolled around using this phone's version of the D-pad, and you can roll up objects that are smaller than the ball, which will add to its overall size, eventually being able to roll up larger and larger things as you progress. Objects that are too large to roll up or uneven terrain must be jumped over, because if you ever get sandwiched between the side of the screen and something that you can't move over, you will die and lose one of your lives. And you can also die by being crushed from falling objects from above or falling into a bottomless pit. There are some new level types that were introduced wherein you can actually roll either left or right, and you need to grow to a specific size to be able to roll up a specific object that's hidden somewhere within the level to be able to end it. Some of the same levels do return from the previous game, but there's also a pretty wide variety of new ones, which does help keep things fresh. I found the controls a lot more smooth in this game, rarely having any issues at all. The ability to dash forward seems to have been removed, and instead the levels have been designed in a way where it's no longer really needed. Thanks to both the more responsive controls and the slightly better level design, the game felt a lot more friendly to play, and I definitely enjoyed playing through it significantly more than I did playing through the basic Katamari Damasikun. The final level of the last mission pack actually has you rolling through space, and what appears to be sprites from the old school game Galaga do make an appearance. It closes out with the king and queen of the cosmos waving to you from a heart, while all of the cousins dance in the background. You can continue to try and beat your high score in the various levels, but otherwise that's more or less all there is to the game. Oi Katamari Damasikun felt like a natural evolution of the gameplay that was featured at the end of the PSP game, and it managed to do it justice while introducing new mechanics and building on the foundation that was already set. I definitely preferred it a lot compared to Katamari Damasikun, and as a result, I'd actually give this one a high C rank. While this game is by no means mind-blowing, it's actually a pretty fun diversion from the main series, and for what it is, it's quite well executed. It's definitely the kind of game that would appeal a lot more to existing fans of the series and not so much those that are new to it, but if you do feel like playing a Katamari game and you're looking for something that's far outside the norm but still fun, Oi Katamari Damasikun will definitely help scratch that itch. Colo, Galita, and Katamari Damacy was a flash game released to promote a popular brand of chocolates in Japan. You could also play a very special version of the game by scanning a QR code that was located in the packaging of boxes of Colo Galita chocolates, and this was called the after dinner version. Only certain versions of phones were actually compatible with the game, meaning it was a little bit more limited in terms of who could actually play and enjoy this. This is yet another game in the series that's actually lost media, not having a modern way to actually play it. The gameplay seems to have been very similar to Katamari Damasikun, with you rolling the Katamari from the left side of the screen to the right as the screen moves forward, with small objects sticking to the ball. And the majority of the objects do seem to be snacks that were produced by the Colo Galita company. Running into larger objects would cause some of what you had collected to actually fly off, but there were ways to regain all of it, as well as potentially power-ups and secret paths through the levels. This game was only ever intended to be available for a limited time, functioning just as an advertisement. It was never meant to be preserved, and as a result, I do think the chances of this game resurfacing are pretty slim. Now we're jumping into lost media territory yet again, this time with a Japanese Keitai game exclusive to Japanese phones that was released in 2010. Minna de Makikomu Katamari Damacy was released through the Mixi mobile service in Japan, which allowed you to download games through the program. Mixi mobile is still a thing in Japan and they do still have games that you can play, but the roster of games gets swapped out and changed every so often, and unfortunately this game disappeared from their library a long time ago without ever seeming to have been preserved. Based on what little information we have, the game does seem to be similar to My Katamari Damasikun, with you playing the prince and rolling the Katamari across the screen in a side-scrolling platforming type adventure, rolling up the contents of a present that the king accidentally knocked over, scattering everything across the world. This game seems to have had a much more typical Katamari art style at its core. Unfortunately, as of right now, no copy of this game has ever resurfaced or been dumped, meaning that it's not playable and is yet again considered lost media. However, unlike some of the other lost media on this list, I am actually hopeful that this game may one day be found, since it was readily available to download from a service that a lot of people did use. Fingers crossed that that happens in the future, at which point I can revisit this and give it a full review. Continuing with the trend of covering lost media in the Katamari series, here we have yet another game, this one being a collaboration between Hudson Soft and Bandai Namco, bringing together the franchises of Katamari Damacy and Adventure Island. This melding of ideas was called Takahashi Meijin and Katamari Damacy. In this game, you play as the main character from Adventure Island, pushing a ball around and rolling up various objects in your path as you go. This was another Flash game played using a special service available exclusively in Japan for specific mobile phones. It apparently reused many of the same assets as the Colo Galita and Katamari Damacy game, and reportedly this game was actually free to play at the time of release. There have been other Keitai games of the Adventure Island series that have been found and preserved, as well as obviously several Katamari games as well, but unfortunately this crossover has yet to turn up. Because there's incredibly limited information about it otherwise, there isn't really much for me to say or cover here. Like all of the other lost media on this list, if it ever does get found and dumped, I'll be sure to review it thoroughly. Much like the Colo Galita game, this one's pretty unlikely that it'll actually turn up, so I'd put it near the bottom of the lost media list as well. Katamari Damacy Online. This MMO was only ever released in South Korea, although there was at one point an English website, meaning they may have been planning to bring it over to North America and Europe. It's also pretty interesting that this game was exclusive to South Korea, never even releasing in its home country of Japan. There are also various advertising campaigns to promote the game, for example this one with Pringles or with South Korean celebrities. There's a surprising amount of promotional material still available. There's actually a lot of new playable cousins that were introduced in this game, and they would go on to appear in later entries in the series. There does seem to be a hub world where players can interact and see news about the series, and there also does seem to be Katamari levels that could be played. There does exist some gameplay videos that were recorded about 15 years ago. This is one of those games that actually makes me a little bit sad that I didn't get to try it, because it seems truly unique, doing something that's never really been done before or since with the series. Getting to choose a cousin and then mess around with other players, doing Katamari levels and the like sounds really fun. I wish that this game had been brought over to the West. Unfortunately, much like all of you, I'm left wondering what may have been. Based on the amount of people who were shown playing it back in the day, it is entirely possible that it could crop up eventually, but I imagine it would be a lot of work to get it running. Now we're covering the first iOS exclusive Katamari game. Katamari Amore was released on older iPhones and iPod Touches, and it's incompatible with iOS 7 or later, meaning this is a pretty early game and not the easiest thing to get running nowadays. Katamari Amore follows the same basic concept as the other mobile Katamari games. You're able to move around using virtual thumbsticks on the screen or also with tilt controls, and there's actually 3 different control schemes in total. Graphically, the game looks relatively clean, although much like the previous mobile games, the performance is far from perfect, with a frame rate that will occasionally jump all over the place. The goal is to roll up objects to make your Katamari larger, and there appears to be 6 main worlds that are available, each of which likely has a story mode, time trial, exact size, and eternal option, similar to what you could do in I Love Katamari. I say that it appears that way because unfortunately, much like Katamari Damacy Mobile, the only version of this game that I was able to find is basically a free demo with only a single level available. You were intended to download the other maps from the App Store, but seeing as the game was delisted over a decade ago and the App Store doesn't work on an Apple device this old, you're pretty much out of luck as far as that goes. Unfortunately, there does not seem to be a copy of this game preserved that includes all of those level packs. And there were a variety of level packs available, including ones that were based on other Namco properties like Pac-Man. They all look like they might have been pretty fun to play based on the archival footage that I could find. Even though I did only get to play a tiny bite-sized chunk of Katamari Amore, I do think that it's likely more to my taste than I Love Katamari was, thanks to having multiple control schemes instead of just tilt. In fact, I had a version of I Love Katamari running on the same device, and doing a comparison between them, I found that the tilt controls actually worked a little better in Katamari Amore. And also, as a side note, this was absolutely the hardest game to get running in the entire series. Most versions of the app require connecting to the iTunes store to even run, so unfortunately there's not a whole lot that I can say about the game because there's so little content that I can actually play. The single 2-minute stage of the demo is really all that I have to go off of. With that in mind, I would give this game a C rank. Having read reviews from the time period, it seems that most people had the same issues that I do, disliking the freemium pricing model as well as the poor performance and somewhat touchy controls. Had I been able to play all of the extra map packs, especially the crossover ones, my opinion might have been a bit different, but with them being unavailable for the time being, it is what it is, and this game seems decent from what I could play, but still flawed in many ways. There was an exclusive to Japan Android mobile game called Katamari Damacy Plus. There is very little information about it other than this one article that I could find on Kotaku and a few other references to it on various sites. From what was reported, it's a straight up port of the original Katamari Damacy mobile. However, this version has up to 4 different control schemes. Based on the screenshots, it looks near identical to I Love Katamari, which was itself based on Katamari Damacy mobile. So it's another game where it's not really clear exactly what we have here. It may have just been a straight up port with some additional control methods, or it could have had some exclusive content. Considering that I Love Katamari was released worldwide though, it's not really clear why Katamari Damacy Mobile Plus was released if it's more or less the same thing. So this is yet another game that is technically lost media. However, since it appears to just be a port of an existing game, for this one you can at least experience what it was like by playing some of the other versions, which is better than we get for most lost media games. Because there's so little information on Katamari Damacy Mobile Plus, meaning that it was not well documented at all, this feels like another one that's pretty unlikely to ever actually turn up. Now we're rolling our way into the PlayStation Vita exclusive Katamari title, Touch My Katamari. This title went for a significantly different aesthetic and added in some new gameplay mechanics while still managing to feel like a traditional game in the series. Harkening back to the original Katamari Damacy, there are 2 plot threads to follow, the first being that the King of the Cosmos is down on his luck and he's no longer beloved by the people. And as per usual, he enlists the help of the prince to perform various requests for his fans to help slowly repair his public image. The second subplot follows this weird gamer man and his quest to study to become smart like the king. This subplot goes absolutely nowhere, by the way. Visually, Touch My Katamari is all over the place. The character model of the king is downright unsettling, reminding me of something out of Attack on Titan. The cartoon cutscenes weave in and out of different animation styles, never really feeling like they have a mastery of any of them. I don't think the overall look of this game really worked. It's definitely memorable, but mainly just because of how disjointed it is. The music all sounded okay, but it was nothing that really stood out, and there were no hit songs in the soundtrack that stayed with me afterwards. There's a few different control schemes that you can use to play. The normal one does seem to work the best for this game. All of the basic moves return, like rolling forwards or shooting the Katamari ball forwards, and the Prince Hop returns as well, but this time it just requires a button press. 2 new game mechanics are introduced, allowing you to stretch and shrink the Katamari by pinching and pulling on the touchscreen. This allows you to get into very low or very narrow areas in the different levels, but I rarely if ever actually use these mechanics. Not because they were flawed, but because the levels rarely required you to actually do it to be able to roll up the different items. And also important to keep in mind that even though the touch controls are relatively minimal, the English version of this game will not run on an unmodified PS TV. It does play a lot better on the actual handheld. Thankfully, the main game didn't experience any real performance issues during my playthrough, maintaining a relatively solid frame rate throughout. There are some downloadable levels which we'll get to later, and those did experience some frame drops. The stages themselves seem relatively unique to Touch My Katamari, but unfortunately none of them were particularly memorable. There are a couple returning mission types, such as rolling up everything in a stage as fast as possible, or rolling up a single bear or cow, but most of the levels are still the basic formula of rolling to a specific size within a time limit, with a sub-objective of getting as much of a specific object type as possible. Touch My Katamari also has two forms of in-game currency. The first, candies, are used to buy various outfits that both the prince and the king can wear, as well as buying unlockable songs and later on alternate level modes. You get varying amounts of candies for completing the levels, with the higher your score the more you get, and you can also multiply the amount that you get using candy tickets or by ranking up in game. The second currency is called Fan Damacy, which are represented in game by these red creatures that will occasionally spawn within the levels and you need to actually roll them up. Their main function is to allow you to unlock special levels, all of which need to be downloaded first but can't be played until you trade 10 Fan Damacies to the secret fan. And there's 9 downloadable levels that you can play, requiring a total of 90 Fan Damacies to be able to play them all. This was an extremely tedious grind. After having played for 5 hours beyond beating the story, following every tip and trick I could find online, I had only managed to collect 30 Fan Damacies. But one of the few paid DLC options for Touch My Katamari is actually buying Fan Damacies. So if you do decide that your time is too valuable to put yourself through this, you do have that option. None of the DLC levels were outright bad, although the final one was overly long and too difficult for my personal tastes. But that being said, none of the levels were all that great either. It feels like they should have just been included in the main game without requiring you to go through all the effort to unlock them. And it is worth keeping in mind that the base game, not counting the DLC levels, is incredibly short. I think I beat it in under 2 hours, and this is counting all of the cutscenes. There are some trophies attached to this game as well, but like most Katamari games, going after 100% completion is one hell of a grind and ultimately not worth it if you value your sanity. So with all of that in mind, I think this game fits pretty comfortably in the B rank tier. It doesn't really innovate in any significant way, feeling like just more of the same. The few quality of life improvements and changes that they implemented were nice additions. Touch My Katamari is a bit of an oddball title. It's one of the few mainline Katamari games that I don't think actually warrants a re-release. A lot of this game's potential is locked specifically to the Vita. Sticking with the theme of mobile Katamari games, now it's time to talk about Katamari Damacy Mobile 2, which was yet again exclusive to Japan. It was published for both iOS and Android devices, and is promoted as a full-on sequel to the original Katamari Damacy Mobile. This is yet another game that is not available for download currently and does not seem to have been preserved online, so at the time of recording this video, it is also lost media. The title screen seems to be very similar to that of Katamari Amore, which makes sense as Katamari Damacy Mobile 2 seems to be an expanded version of that title, including the additional control schemes as well as the Namco-themed DLC stages, with ones based on Pac-Man, Tekken, and Galaga. Katamari Damacy Mobile 2 seems to have followed the same style and freemium pricing model as Katamari Amore, with just one time trial stage available when you first download it. You then need to buy the remaining stage packs in order to experience the full game, so the fact that it was a free download doesn't really mean much. Per the reviews that it got, this game also didn't seem to feature any music, which is a very odd choice. So it really does just appear to be an improved and possibly expanded version of Katamari Amore. And much like that game and several others from this series, Katamari Damacy Mobile 2 was taken down from the App Store in 2015 due to the fact that it was no longer compatible with newer versions of iOS and was not receiving any updates. But I will say that this game in particular seems a little bit more likely to turn up than some of the others that are in the lost media category, thanks to it being somewhat more recent and having received a lot of coverage. With that in mind, it was probably more popular and well known than some of the other spin-offs. I am hoping that this game turns up eventually, but for now, it's yet another entry in the Katamari series that we're just left to speculate about. Let's Make a Planet Everyone's Katamari Damacy was a mobile game exclusive to Japan, designed by the company Char Room. This game was created for Namco's Namco Creator Program, which is also sometimes referred to as the Catalog IP Program or the Open Game Program. Bandai Namco started this program in 2015, and it allowed other studios to use their IP to make mobile and web games with zero licensing fees. Interestingly enough, this program was not intended as a way for Bandai Namco to actually make money, but instead was just a way to keep their IPs relevant by introducing a ton of new approved games into the market. The story is explained right at the top, with the King of the Cosmos having had too much to drink, resulting in the destruction of the planets in the solar system. It is then the job of the prince to roll up objects on various stages so that the Katamari ball can then be turned into replacements for the missing planets. Pretty standard fare as far as the Katamari series goes. The graphics in Let's Make a Planet Everyone's Katamari Damacy all look extremely crisp and clean, and the music as well featured a variety of tracks that were all catchy and fit the overall vibe of the series. So this title takes the form of an endless runner, with the prince always running forwards, and you're able to steer him to the left or the right using these two virtual buttons at the bottom of the screen. The controls are actually really responsive. The prince can turn on a dime if needed. Any objects that are smaller than the Katamari ball will be added to it, increasing the overall size, but objects that are too large will actually deflect and even hold the Katamari ball up. While rolling down the course, various animals and other large objects will be speeding towards you, and making contact with them will send you shooting backwards a pretty long distance. Each level has a timer, and if you do not reach the required size goal within that time, you then fail and you need to try again. The stages themselves don't seem to ever actually change, you're just able to access further parts of them as you level up and the timer increases. There's only one power-up available, which you get by rolling up 5 gems, and this will let you shoot forwards and cover a lot of ground, knocking aside any hazards that are in your way. In these various levels, you collect coins, and these can then be used to level up the Katamari, increasing how fast it grows and also increasing the time limit for each stage. You are also rewarded with coins at the end of the levels even if you don't successfully complete them. Coins are also used to buy various cousins that you can play as, which you get through this roulette system, which might give you repeats. Even with the element of random chance though, it wasn't that hard to get all of the cousins, and when you get duplicates you can actually get back some of the coins that you spent. It did become quite a grind towards the end. Most of the runs that you do are just there to build up your coins, because you do need to actively upgrade to be able to have a chance at completing the levels. And so with all of that in mind, I would give it a very low B rank. It was actually really refreshing to see an entirely new concept done well with the Katamari series. Usually we just get variations of the same thing over and over. There was unfortunately quite a bit of repetition and not a ton of variety in the stages themselves, but what you did get to play here was reasonably fun, and as a game to just pick up and play for a few minutes here and there, it definitely succeeds. We're diving into yet another mobile game, this one being Tap My Katamari, which was available for Android and iOS. Tap My Katamari is what's called a clicker style game. Clicker type games are an entire genre, usually either on mobile or PC, where the gameplay primarily consists of tapping or clicking repeatedly and watching a lot of numbers go up. Tap My Katamari adds its own flavor to the formula, managing to mix it up and actually keep it interesting. First off, I really like the look of Tap My Katamari. It has a very cartoony aesthetic that works very well in tandem with the type of game that this is. The soundtrack consists of just 3 songs, one of which is a banger remix of Lonely Rolling Star, so while I do wish there was more variety, I did very much like what we got here. There is no story whatsoever. It's entirely about the gameplay, which consists of tapping the screen to make the prince push the Katamari ball forwards, and as he does, he'll be consistently rolling up items, all of which will give you coins. These coins can then be spent to level up the prince, which will increase how much distance you travel per tap, and also you can purchase the help of cousins who will appear on screen and provide passive buffs. The different cousins that you've purchased will also continue to collect money for you while you are offline and not playing the game. Whenever you open the game back up, there will be a cash bonus for you to immediately use. Each cousin also has a base power stat, which gets multiplied by the distance that the prince travels, increasing the amount that you'll move per tap or when idle. And if you get one of the cousins to level 1000, you then get the option to quote-unquote love them, which basically provides a huge boost to their power for a large monetary fee. The King of the Cosmos will occasionally float down across your screen, and tapping on him will give you an immediate cash bonus, or candy, which is a second currency that is used to buy temporary power-ups, as well as leveling up special cousins that will stay with you even if you reset your playthrough. You can also get candy by completing various daily challenges that will reset every few hours. Each level is broken down into sections of 10, with the final section being a time trial that requires you to be able to cover a set amount of distance within said time limit. limit. If you fail, you can keep rolling on that part of the stage, getting more coins and buying upgrades until eventually you're fast enough to restart the time trial and move on. Whenever the prince reaches level 600, you're then given the option of resetting your level back to 0, which will remove all the power-ups and upgrades that you've purchased, as well as all of the non-permanent cousins and their associated levels and buffs. Resetting your progress will provide you with star tokens, which can then be spent on purchasing presents, which are super powerful items with persistent buffs that will carry over between playthroughs. Strategically purchasing these presents will make future runs a lot easier and faster, and while there are other ways to get stars, the only way to really get a large quantity is from resetting your progress. So when the run does slow down significantly, and it becomes hard to progress from one stage to another, it is recommended that you do this. And after having collected enough presents, you can then actually enter the Cosmos, where there are essentially a bunch of super presents, which cost a lot more to buy an upgrade, but give even more significant bonuses. There is no real end to this game. There are the level goals that are presented to you in game, but it's yet again another game where you pretty much just play until you're tired of it. And Tap My Katamari is a freemium style game, meaning there is a store where you can spend real money to purchase various things in game, like the in-game currencies. And Tap My Katamari also lets you watch ads in order to recharge abilities faster, increase the yield of coins that you'll get from the king, etc. And while I did find the advertisements pretty obtrusive, they did make the game significantly faster and easier, so there was definitely a trade-off here. Tap My Katamari is surprisingly fun for what seems to be a really basic concept. The management aspect of leveling the different cousins and their abilities, as well as the princess level and your power-ups, it was all surprisingly addictive. And the fact that you still make progress even when you set the game aside does actually work in its favor, with breaks from the game being a strategic course of action. So with all of that in mind, I would actually throw it into the middle of the B tier. There was a lot more planning and strategy in this game than I was expecting, and I did appreciate that while there were advertisements and microtransactions, they could be completely ignored without affecting your enjoyment of the game. While definitely not for everyone, Tap My Katamari is a lot more fun than it seems on the surface. I willingly put dozens of hours into this one, making it the longest playthrough in this entire series, and I enjoyed pretty much all of it. So if you're looking for something different than the mainline games, it may actually be worth checking out. Now it's time to cover the last mobile game in the Katamari series thus far, Amazing Katamari Damacy, which came out on both iOS and Android. Amazing Katamari Damacy is an endless runner, with some of its own unique quirks and twists on the formula. The game starts off with the king and queen painting the universe, and they accidentally get black paint on the highway after being distracted by the prince. This creates black holes that suck up everything around them. The king enlists the help of the prince to roll up objects to make new stars to replace the ones that have gone missing. Graphically, this game actually looks really good. The transition from the main menu to actually starting a level really stands out. It did unfortunately suffer frequent performance issues, and this was even though I was playing it on a device from the correct time period and I met all of the required specs. The music seems to all be existing tracks from previous games. As far as I can tell, there isn't anything original or remixed. In Amazing Katamari Damacy, the prince runs forward at all times, and using the primary control scheme, you slide your finger along the bottom of the screen to make him move left or right, and you can flick up to make him jump. There's also a tilt-based control scheme that I noped out of immediately. The prince will roll up any objects in front of him that are smaller than the Katamari ball. Hitting too many large objects will make the king upset, eventually ending the level if his anger bar gets too high, and the same thing also happens if you run into a black hole. You still do only run through one level, just getting as far as possible, but per the information available online, there were different looks and skins available for this, but unfortunately, obviously, the shop is no longer online. The main gameplay loop involves rolling around the levels and finding rainbow colored parts that are then used to assemble rockets on the main screen. The game actually tells you that there's no real point in playing if all 3 rockets are on a timer waiting for launch, meaning that Amazing Katamari Damacy is really intended to be played in 10-minute bursts every few hours. When you launch a rocket, you get a variety of rewards, usually some coins and rubies, but the main focus is the constellation pieces. And these will slowly upgrade the constellations themselves, which will provide a score bonus to picking up the specific types of items that are associated with them. And much like Tap My Katamari, there is a system where watching ads will provide you with rewards, such as being able to continue a run after dying or getting additional coins. The ads in Amazing Katamari Damacy are extremely intrusive. Even simple things like setting a rocket to launch can trigger an ad. It's extremely annoying. Completing the daily challenges for the king will reward you with rubies, which can be used to revive the Katamari if you die during a run, or skip the arbitrary cooldowns like not being able to launch a rocket for 8 hours. And the missions for the queen will reward you with a large sum of coins. Coins are used to purchase upgrades for the various cousins that appear in the stages, and they offer a brief power-up. There are 6 cousins in total, although one is locked behind connecting the game to Facebook, no thank you, and their abilities can be extremely helpful, like using Fumin to absorb all of the items that are around you. This is also one of the only Katamari games that I've played that was legitimately stressful, with every run feeling like it was very high stakes. And one of my biggest complaints with Amazing Katamari Damacy is just how easy it is to hit objects and die. And this happens all the time if your Katamari sizes up because it's very disorienting. And hitting one object will often send you pinballing around hitting multiple. Even when you're multiple times larger than one, clipping a black hole means an immediate end to the run, which is very frustrating. And the required rubies to be able to keep going after you die scales the further into the run that you get, meaning it would often be too expensive to actually do so. There is no actual end to this game. It just keeps on going for as long as you're willing to actually play. And with all that in mind, I plant this game pretty firmly in the D rank tier. I really disliked Amazing Katamari Damacy. It had very imprecise controls, terrible hitboxes, and is based on a business model that absolutely pounds you over the head with advertisements. It's very much one of those mobile games that tries to sell your time back to you, arbitrarily making things like launching rockets take several hours unless you use gems, which are scarce in game but could be bought for real money. It's a prime example of the fact that it doesn't matter how shiny and nice a game looks if the core mechanics and gameplay just aren't satisfying. Katamari Damacy Reroll is the true HD re-release of the game for modern consoles, including updated controls and visuals. For the most part, this is just a straight-up re-release of the original game from the PS2 era, and it doesn't feature any new or exclusive content that wasn't there before. In a lot of ways, I think the minimal changes work in this game's favor, because it also isn't missing anything, being one of the few HD re-releases of older games to still have the entirety of its original soundtrack. The plot is still the same as it has always been, with the King of the Cosmos destroying the stars in the night sky, and then sending his son, the prince, to Earth in order to roll up objects with his Katamari ball that the king can then place in the night sky to replace the stars he destroyed. Visually, the game looks very clean, reminding me a lot of beautiful Katamari on the Xbox 360. The art style, as usual, does look a little bit flat in the modern era, but I do feel like changing it would have caused just as many issues, so I understand why nothing was really done. One strange choice in this release, though, is that the cutscenes don't use the English dialogue, instead only having the original Japanese voice track, although thankfully with subtitles. Control-wise, it still feels a lot like the original did, and this had been one of my concerns since often ports will lose the nuance of the controls of early titles like this. You are still spending the majority of levels rolling around on Earth, collecting objects that are smaller than your ball to slowly increase its size, aiming for a specific size goal to be able to complete the level and move on. A few levels in the game do have some different requirements, like rolling up the biggest bear or cow possible, or rolling up as many crabs as you can to make the cancer sign. I also do like that the more unconventional levels don't really have a fail condition, with the only thing stopping you from just getting it done as fast as possible being shame. Katamari Damacy is also before they started really metering out how long each level takes to complete, and so I actually reached the goal often with more than half of the time left on the clock in these various levels. This was a lot of fun in the earlier stages, but I do think that the levels near the end of the game are just way too long. Level 8 takes 18 minutes to complete, and it goes up even more from there. While I do appreciate that the game tried to give you the full experience from when you're super tiny to super huge in a singular level, I do think that there's a happy middle ground that needs to be found with this, which is why most of the later games in the series rarely if ever had levels that are this long, usually breaking it up into much more reasonable chunks of playtime. The PlayStation 4 version of this game does come with a sizable list of trophies, the majority of which can just be obtained through regular play. The final few trophies are super tedious though, and I don't recommend going for them. Since I've needed to cover this game a multitude of times already, I don't really feel like there's all that much left to cover that I haven't already talked about. I do think that this is probably the best re-release that Katamari Damacy has ever seen, and I did find it to be overall a smooth experience with just a few performance hiccups here and there. The issues that I have with the game are still the same as they were in the original, and they're relatively minor compared to all of the fun that this game has to offer. If you have played through the later console releases of this series, Katamari Damacy can definitely feel a bit bare bones by comparison, but taken on its own, it's still a spectacular game, and for that reason, I still give it an S rank. If you've never tried this series before, then Katamari Damacy Reroll is a really good starting point. And the same goes for if you haven't played it since the PS2 era, because Reroll manages to preserve the spirit and charm of the original game while being available on pretty much all modern platforms. And I still think it's worth coming back to this one, even after all of these years. Katamari Damacy Mini is yet another game that you can play in your web browser, but this time it's running on HTML5 instead of Flash, having released in 2019. Katamari Damacy Mini is a 2D side-scrolling endless runner. Graphically, the game looks nice and colorful, with a very cartoony aesthetic that works well for a browser game. The music doesn't have a lot of variety, but being that this is a pretty short experience overall, that's not all that surprising, and the tracks that are present here do sound pretty good. So you play the prince, and he's at all times running towards the right, and you can move him up or down and jump or double jump to get over obstacles. There are 5 stages total that you can play in Katamari Damacy Mini, with only the first being unlocked at the start, and then when you get to a certain number of points in each level, it will unlock the next one. These points are obtained by rolling over objects and adding them to your Katamari. In addition to objects, there's also coins that you can roll up throughout the stages, and after the level ends, you can then use these to purchase power-ups from the prince's cousins. The first one, Nickel, will grant you additional lives, Macho will let you plow through spikes that get in your way, Fumin will cause objects and coins around you to get sucked up, and Dip will double the point values of all coins and objects. After you purchase these upgrades, they then appear in the level in the form of floating heads that you need to jump into in order to collect and activate them. Each of them will have a short timer before they run out, but the more you upgrade each of these, the longer they last. And something I really liked is that you can actually have multiple power-ups active at once, and using these power-ups is absolutely key to being able to complete the various stages. There's no real end to any of the stages. It is an endless runner after all. The course just becomes faster and faster with more and more obstacles as you progress. The only real objective is to get enough points to open up the next level. When you do finally open up the final stage, there's no objective in it. It's mainly just used for grinding coins to further upgrade the cousins or get the various achievements. And there are actually quite a few built-in achievements in this game. I unlocked all save for a small handful just through normal play. There's not really much else to say about Katamari Damacy Mini. It's a fun, short game that was released for free, and it takes maybe 15 to 30 minutes of time to play through it. It's relatively polished for what it is, and it ended right as I was starting to get bored with it, which was great. Considering how much I liked it, I would actually give it a very low B rank. There are other Katamari games of a similar style that do something along the same lines as this, but Katamari Damacy Mini does a very good job at what it's trying to do, offering a very tight and compact experience. It's definitely a fun little diversion, reminiscent of some of the very early Flash games. That being said, it was a little hard to actually track down online, with the original website that hosted it having taken it down. So if you do like the look of this game, I recommend trying it sooner rather than later, before it eventually vanishes off the internet for good. We Love Katamari Reroll plus Royal Reverie is a direct remaster of We Love Katamari on the PS2, following much the same style as Katamari Damacy Reroll, but unlike that remaster, this one actually includes a variety of gameplay tweaks and improvements, as well as some new content in the form of the Reverie levels. The game starts where Katamari Damacy ended, with Katamari Damacy now being a very well-known phenomenon in the world, causing many adoring fans to pop up who will then shower the king with praise. You take level requests from these various fans, who typically want to see something from the first game, such as the Royal Rainbow or a truly massive Katamari. As you progress throughout We Love Katamari, several new level types will crop up. A good portion of the plot is told through flashback cutscenes, detailing the relationship of the King of the Cosmos and his father, as well as showing how he first met and fell in love with the Queen, eventually culminating in the birth of the prince. I like the cutscenes and plot in this one a lot more than I did in the first game, because they actually seemed relevant and not a completely unrelated story. Graphically, this game once again looks like a very clean upscale of the original, mirroring Katamari Damacy Reroll. The art style is not changed or updated in any significant way, meaning that while it is very faithful to the original designs, it can look a bit bare bones, with some of the moodiness of the levels kind of ending up a bit lost in translation. I did notice a few visual glitches as well, like this water along the shoreline, but otherwise there weren't any real issues with it, and performance-wise this game ran almost perfectly. The music is still the same as it was in the original, and it's one of the better soundtracks in the series, even if I don't think it quite measures up to the original Katamari Damacy. The controls feel really good in this remaster. It's one of the more intuitive games to play in the Katamari series. It still has the same basic control scheme where you push both sticks forward to move, and you're trying to roll up objects that are smaller than your Katamari ball to slowly increase its size. This remake adds a lot of new menus and icons to help keep track of when new missions are available, as well as some really nice quality of life options, like being able to skip the dialogue of the fans and the king before you start a level. We Love Katamari pioneered a bunch of ideas that would go on to feature in the later games in the series. I really appreciate the variety of levels that you can choose from, and while the later parts of the game do have you redo the same stages just with harder requirements, the fact that you can reach the final level of the game and roll the credits without having to do every single mission and level definitely works in this game's favor. It did bring back a lot of fan favorites from the original game, like the cow bear level, and it also added in some iconic levels of its own, like this optional post-game one that requires you to roll up 1 million roses. The Royal Reverie side content is completely new to this version. It has you play as the king in his youth, doing missions for his estranged father. There aren't a ton of new missions added here, and they mostly mirror missions that are in the main game, but it was a fun little diversion that helped mix things up, keep it fresh, and overall it helped the plot tie in with the cutscenes a little bit more thoroughly. The trophies for We Love Katamari plus Royal Reverie are surprisingly reasonable. They don't require you to roll up every single item in the game or do a bunch of arbitrary things over and over. There is a secret level that you can unlock for rolling up all of the cousins, and if you're pursuing that, almost every other trophy will unlock along the way, meaning this is one of, if not the only mainline Katamari game that I actually recommend going for the platinum if you do enjoy it. So all in all, I think We Love Katamari Reroll plus Royal Reverie was a great remaster of an already amazing game. And unlike the remaster of Katamari Damacy, this one does actually improve in the places that it can, as well as adding in some new content which, while relatively light, does still help to add to the overall experience. I had a really good time with this game, even better than I did with the original, and for that reason I would give it an S rank right up near the top. We Love Katamari already builds on the foundations of its predecessor, adding in a lot of new gameplay elements and fine-tuning what was already there, and this remaster manages to take that even further, offering a very polished and solid entry in the series. I do think that this game hits harder if you've played the original, but overall this version of We Love Katamari is extremely fun, and as a nice bonus it's available on pretty much every major platform, so I definitely recommend giving this one a chance if you're a fan of the series and you haven't yet tried it. Now we're playing a tiny minigame that's actually built into the Google search engine, and it doesn't really have a name, so I'm just going to call it Katamari Google Game. So if you go to Google search and you actually Google the word Katamari, on your screen there will be this little ball, and if you press it, it actually starts a minigame where you can roll the ball around on your screen using the arrow keys. It also works on mobile and has no real purpose other than just being a fun little Easter egg. It's not clear exactly when this started to be available to play, first being talked about around a month after the release of We Love Katamari Reroll plus Royal Reverie. The best guess seems to be that it was likely implemented as part of the marketing for that game. There's not really a lot to talk about here. You just roll the ball around on screen and pick up some pictures and text. Some stuff on the screen can't be rolled up, but it's not clear a reason for it. This minigame is extremely brief. It's not meant to take up much of your time. I was definitely surprised and enamored by it when I found out, and for that reason, even though it's more or less a nothing game, I'd give it a high C rank. In a lot of ways, it reminds me of the old Katamari Flash games, which were only meant to last a few minutes before you move on, and they totally nailed the specific thing that they're trying to accomplish. There's no real depth to this game, but it's a really fun Easter egg and one that's definitely worth checking out while you still can. Who knows for how long this will still be available. Now we're covering one of the stranger modern releases in the Katamari series, Katamari Damacy Rolling Live. This game is an Apple Arcade exclusive, which is probably why most people, myself included, have never heard of it. It can be played on a variety of devices like iPhones and iPads, but in the interest of giving this game the best chance possible, I did play it on a computer using a controller. In Katamari Damacy Rolling Live, the King of the Cosmos has decided to try his hand at live streaming, since it's all the rage with the kids these days. And the levels that you undertake in this game are actually collabs with other streamers. There's even a live chat during the levels on the right hand side of the screen showing what these chatters are saying. The way that you unlock new levels is by getting enough fans that the larger streamers want to collab with you. It's very strange, which is relatively par for the course when it comes to the Katamari series. Visually, I think the game looks pretty good. The aesthetic matches the games of old, but it's also very crisp. And the performance was also very solid, with the game running at 4K 60 on a Mac that's more than 6 6 years old. The soundtrack is filled with banger after banger, probably being my favorite in the entire Katamari series right after the original. While there are some returning tracks, the vast majority of the music here is new, and it absolutely fit the style of the series and this game in particular. The default control scheme is slightly modified from what we're used to, only requiring one joystick to roll forwards, and you're able to shoot the Katamari forward with a press of a trigger. The second joystick is dedicated entirely to the camera. This actually reminded me a lot of the way that the PS Vita Katamari game controlled. The one thing that I wish had been brought back that was missing was actually the Prince Hop. As per usual, you roll the Katamari ball around, with objects that are smaller than it sticking to it, eventually making it grow in size until you can even roll up things like skyscrapers and planets. It was extremely refreshing to get to play in entirely new levels, instead of the same ones recycled from the previous games over and over. The levels also focused a lot on verticality, which made it actually worth exploring every nook and cranny. I also really appreciated that they had the time limit dialed in. Any of the levels that had a set timer maxed out at 8 minutes, and the more freeform levels rarely ever exceeded 5. There's also a ton of variety in the mission types. There are some familiar ones that return, but they also added a ton of short form levels where you need to hit a certain size as fast as possible, or levels focused on getting as many of a specific item as possible, and the mission types that do return from the old games now always have a nice twist on them. For example, this one where you need to roll up glow sticks referencing the Firefly level. And they've also supported this game post-launch with various updates, many of which include new and unique levels. Each level also has 3 optional objectives to complete while you're playing, such as rolling up a certain amount of objects or beating the objective within a certain time limit. Completing these will reward you with stars, which increase the king's popularity in viewers, opening up more levels as you go. The only time I ever had to actually work to unlock a level was the secret level that you get by collecting all of the different cousins. The level that you unlock mirrors the one in We Love Katamari, where it's devoted to rolling up each and every cousin that you found in the main game. The viewers of your live streams also generate candy over time, and you can claim this and then use it to purchase cosmetics, new outfits, songs, or even other cousins. I really appreciate the balance that they achieved between bringing back old level styles, updating the old concepts, and adding in new ones of their own. Everything in Katamari Damacy Rolling Live felt extremely polished, and in a lot of ways this game did remind me of We Love Katamari. It felt like its true successor and sequel, and this was some of the most fun I've had playing a Katamari game, period. So with all of that in mind, this game actually gets an S rank. I really enjoyed it. Weird live streaming gimmicks set aside, this is the freshest and most innovative Katamari game that I've seen in years. It's the kind of evolution of the series that I was always expecting, and that's also why it's so baffling to me that this game is hidden away exclusively on Apple Arcade, which is a platform where it won't get seen or played by anywhere near as many people as it would have if it just got a normal console release. It's an incredibly solid entry and one that I highly recommend playing if you're able to. Now we're diving into Once Upon a Katamari, a much anticipated release that's available on all modern platforms. Once Upon a Katamari starts with a very quick backstory about the king, and then you're dropped into the shoes of the prince, helping the king and queen clean up their house. The king unearths a magical scroll, which he throws into the sky, where it destroys everything in its path and then starts absorbing all of the planets and stars around it. The scroll holds a record of the entire history of the Earth, so the king then sends you back in time to roll up things through different time periods to help restore the planets and stars that are missing. You do this via a spaceship known as the SS Prince, and you're able to freely hop between different eras as needed. Visually, the game is very much in line with the previous releases. Performance-wise, the game did suffer a bit, at least on the PlayStation 5, occasionally freezing up during the loading screens. I'm playing this near release, so there probably will be patches to help fix this. There isn't a ton of story in this game. There are some cutscenes that depict the king, queen, and various cousins throughout the different time periods, but they're not really there to advance the plot, and are more just adding fun and interesting vignettes to each area that you explore. Once Upon a Katamari has a very large focus on customization, allowing you to decorate your ship with different themes, play as multiple different cousins, or even design your own. You can also change things like the expression of your playable character, with different ones being unlocked by spending king tokens at this king statue. The soundtrack is okay. It was relatively inoffensive with no real bad tracks that I could pick out, but it also didn't have any really memorable songs for me. The gameplay still uses the basic premise as in the previous games, where you roll around this sticky ball, with objects that are smaller to it being absorbed, eventually causing it to grow in size and allowing you to roll up larger and larger objects as you go. Instead of just getting a rank at the end of a level depending on your performance, there are now also 3 crowns hidden in each level that can be rolled up. And there is a couple levels that even require you to have gotten a specific number of crowns to unlock them. power-ups return in this entry, and they bring back the magnetic power from Katamari Forever, and they also add one that'll cause the Katamari to move much faster or stop the timer and freeze creatures in place. The most useful in the late game was this sonar power, which points out where the collectibles and hidden objects are. There are 10 different eras, from old school Japan, ancient Rome, the Wild West, and more. Having these different eras did help mix things up and mitigate some of the level fatigue that I often feel in some of the other Katamari games. That being said, not every era was overly fleshed out. Some of them only had a handful of levels you could actually complete, and some, like Japan, had far too many. Level variety was pretty on point, with tons of different mission types, many of which are completely new. A few old level types do return, like the Cow Bear level, or even the Sprinkler one from Katamari Forever. And there are also some homages to old level styles, and overall I think Once Upon a Katamari did a really good job of offering both new and familiar level types. One complaint that I do have though is that they were a lot more free in terms of the timer, with lots of levels being above the 10-minute mark. They also unfortunately brought back the mechanic where there are multiple cousins to roll up in each level. You could only get the second cousin if you've already beaten the level and rolled the first one and then start it again, and the third one will also require a new run, etc. So having to replay these levels over and over, some of which are as long as 18 minutes, did become a real slog before the end. They also added a Katamari versus rolling mode that is very reminiscent of the one that was in the lost South Korean game Katamari Damacy Online, and you can even play this against NPCs. It was a fun addition, although not one that I spent a ton of time with. I do also think that there are far too many cutscenes in the levels themselves, and this is compounded with all the dialogue from the king and different characters. While it is massively appreciated that you almost always have the option of skipping it, it did get annoying to have to constantly be exercising this option. And I do feel like the power-ups have too much focus in this game. In Once Upon a Katamari, getting the power-ups and using them at the right time can absolutely make or break the run. It felt like the power-ups were kind of stealing center stage, as opposed to the base gameplay mechanics that we all know and love. You don't need to have beaten every level or challenge to unlock the ending. All of the trophies in the game are tied to getting 3 crowns in the various levels. And while you definitely do need to go a bit out of your way to accomplish this, overall it wasn't all that bad. I do find it a bit hard to recommend doing this though unless you're a huge fan of the game, because finding all of the cousins so that you can unlock the crowns in their levels was something that I just found very tedious. Once Upon a Katamari felt like a natural evolution of the series, managing to work in a lot of different ideas from the entries before it, with power-ups that were reminiscent of the Endless Runners, an ending sequence that mirrored the Katamari Google game, and an online mode that was reminiscent of the South Korean MMO. I do think the game spent far too much time on customization options that ultimately didn't really do much for me, and I also think it failed to flesh out some of the more interesting time periods as much as I would have liked. But overall, Once Upon a Katamari did succeed significantly more than it failed and was pretty fun. So with all of that in mind, I'd place Once Upon a Katamari in the middle of the A rank bracket. Once Upon a Katamari didn't feel quite as fresh as something like Katamari Damacy Rolling Live did, but it was a very natural continuation of the series, and I think that this game was a great step in the right direction. And that's all of the Katamari games so far. There were a ton of entries to keep track of, so it definitely did get a bit confusing. I tried to be as absolutely thorough as possible, but if I did miss a game somewhere along the way, let me know and I'll be sure to review it as well. The Katamari series is one that I've absolutely loved ever since first being introduced to it, and although I do feel like it flatlined a bit in the 2010s, I'm very happy to see legitimately new entries start to pop up over the last couple of years. And I hope that this continues to be a new trend in addition to releasing remasters of the old classics, because those games deserve to find a new audience as well. Thank you so much for watching, everyone. I very much appreciate it, and hopefully I'll catch you in a future video. Take care, everyone.